Good morning. I'm still reporting on Pence, the traitor. On January 6, 2021, a group of Republican members of Congress raised objections to the certification of the Electoral College results for the 2020 presidential election. These members believed that there were significant concerns regarding the election's integrity and wanted a 10-day stay in the certification process to allow the state legislatures to examine the newly evolving evidence of election fraud and potentially reconsider their electoral vote distributions. The core argument put forward by these members can be summarized as follows. They pointed to massive election irregularities in several states during the 2020 presidential election. These claims ranged from concerns about the handling of mail-in ballots, the issue of poll observers not being granted proper access to oversee the vote counting process, and security camera video evidence of counterfeit ballots being run through tabulators after all poll watchers were hustled out of the counting area. If that's not bad enough, completely ignored was the testimony of a truck driver who reported that he drove 250,000 pre-marked ballots from Long Island, New York to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on election evening. The so-called insurrectionists emphasized the constitutional authority of state legislatures to regulate the way presidential electors are chosen. According to this argument, the Constitution grants state legislatures the primary responsibility for determining the rules for appointing presidential electors, and if they believed that the election process had been compromised, they had the power, in fact the duty, to reevaluate the results. According to Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri, I objected to the votes of the state of Pennsylvania because they didn't follow their own laws. The members who raised objections believed that sending the results back to the state legislatures would help maintain public confidence in the electoral process. They argue that a more thorough examination of the alleged irregularities and any potential legislative action taken by the state legislatures would help ensure the integrity of future elections. Some members expressed concerns about the potential precedent of allowing alleged irregularities to go unaddressed. They believed that by not thoroughly examining these claims, it could set a troubling precedent for future elections, undermining the democratic process. And that is exactly the situation we find ourselves in today. It seems that nothing in the 5 battleground states has changed over the past 2.5 years. In Georgia, for example, an expert report by Professor J. Alex Halderman, Ph.D., and Professor Drew Springle, Ph.D., was finally released by a federal court in mid-June. But this report was written 2 years ago. It showed that these Dominion voting machines, first used in the 2020 presidential election, can be hacked, votes can be changed, and elections altered. However, Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has been hiding the report from the public under a lower court seal. Security patches are now available for these machines. However, according to Professor Halderman, astonishingly, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who has been aware of our findings for 2 years, just announced that the state will not get around to installing Dominion's security patches until after the 2024 presidential election. The day before election 2020, most Americans still had hope for election integrity because Vice President Pence hinted at his general support for exposing the massive election interference at a rally in Milner, Georgia, the day before the Electoral College met on January 6, 2021.
And I want to assure you, I share the concerns of millions of Americans about voting irregularities. And I promise you, come this Wednesday, we'll have our day in Congress. We'll hear the objections. We'll hear the evidence. But tomorrow is Georgia's day.
However, in his book, Pence told his daughter as they rode away from the Capitol on January 6th words to this effect: "Those poor people are going to be so disappointed in me by tomorrow." In other words, that little pep rally speech the night before was nothing but an enticement for the crowd to think the election was going to be sent back to the legislatures for review. Now let's take a look at what Pence said this week about the January 6th Antifa-led, FBI-supported riot.
For my part, I want people to know that I had no right to overturn the election, and that what the president maintained that day, and frankly has said over and over again over the last 2.5 years, is completely false. And it's contrary to what our Constitution and the laws of this country provide.
So what, Mike the Traitor? Anyone who has read the U.S. Constitution can clearly see that. But you did have the right to grant the Republican request to pause the final certification for 10 days to allow the various state legislators to debate the existing evidence of massive fraud in their own states. Otherwise, there's no other place to do it than on the floor of the Electoral College. The Supreme Court won't touch it because they have no enthusiasm for making a decision that would change the election. That has to be done at the state legislature level. There's no other place to do it. This was especially appropriate under the local conditions of an intelligence agency engineered riot around the Capitol building at the time. Is this allegation known for sure? As a matter of fact, this is known for sure. When FBI Director Christopher Wray was questioned by the House Oversight Committee recently concerning how many undercover FBI agents participated in the January 6th riot, he refused to answer the question. He could have simply said 0, but he didn't, probably because he knew that someday in the near future, one of those agent provocateurs would become a whistleblower and blow the top off this huge cover-up, and Director Wray will be caught lying under oath. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri went on the Joni Lamb Table Talk show on the Daystar Network on Tuesday night to discuss election integrity in the upcoming election 2024.
But can we trust that process? Is it going to be fair voting? What's your thought on that?
Well, listen, I've obviously taken a stand on this in the United States Senate. I mean, this is why way back in January 6th of 2021, I objected to the votes of the state of Pennsylvania in that presidential election because they didn't follow their own laws. And the left hated that and criticized me for it left, right, and center. But the truth is that we need to be assured in this country that our elections are transparent, that they are fair, and that every vote counts equally. One person, one vote. And I'm worried that what we saw in states like Pennsylvania, where you had courts changing the rules and you had ballots being counted late, and I mean, that is not the kind of free, fair, equal voting that our Constitution guarantees. So I am concerned about it. I applaud states like my home state of Missouri, where we've got strong, tough election integrity laws. I applaud the states that have been trying to toughen up their integrity laws to protect the fairness and transparency of the ballot. And all I can say is that state by state, the states get to set most of the rules when it comes to balloting in this country. And that's as it should be. I certainly don't want the Washington bureaucrats dictating it. But I do think that where we are, whatever state you live in, you want to make sure that your state, encourage your elected officials in your state to protect the vote, to make sure that it is transparent, to make sure that when they start counting, they don't stop, that they publicize what they're doing. It's all done out in public, that any absentee voting is verified, and that we have these. We used to be totally uncontroversial, and now all of a sudden the left has decided that they're not interested in election integrity anymore. I think that's a mistake, and I think we've got to protect free and fair elections in this country.
Let's talk a little, if we could, for a moment about censorship. I know that from 2020, 2021, 2022, I interviewed some of the most brilliant doctors, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Peter McCullough, one of the most peer-reviewed cardiologists in America that's here in Dallas, who actually would share the science behind the mRNA vaccinations. And not that we want to get into all that, because we know people have been vaccinated, people have not been vaccinated, but just the censorship of some of the most brilliant doctors going against the narrative of Fauci and the WHO, et cetera, et cetera. Could you have ever imagined that we would live in an America that would do that?
No, and I can't imagine that I couldn't have imagined that we'd live in a country where the president of the United States would go out and call for American citizens to be censored and kicked off of public media, kicked off of social media, kicked off of radio and TV for simply asking questions, which, by the way, turned out in many cases to be true. When you had people talking about, well, now, wait a minute, is the vaccine really necessary for this group or that group? Hold on, can we see the studies about COVID origins? You know, we were told you can't say that COVID maybe came from a lab. Now we know that most of the U.S. government thinks it did come from a lab. And that's where the intelligence actually indicates what the intelligence indicates. Now we know that the vaccine probably isn't safe, at least for certain segments of people, and that they hid much of that information from us all of the time. I mean, it's really outrageous how they have tried to stifle free speech in this country. Say they, I mean the government, and I mean particularly this administration. I mean, let's be clear. This administration right now in the White House is the most anti-free speech administration in American history. And it is really extraordinary. It's dangerous. It's really, really dangerous. And I think that we've got to be clear that we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in the right to speak up so that we can have a voice and have a say in our government. And now more than ever, we've got to stand for that.
Well, I do appreciate your stand. I wonder what motivates you to stand in the face of such opposition. Maybe a year ago or so, I saw one of the Hollywood stars just going after you. And I was just like, you know, you continue on, Josh. You got a good name there, Joshua. Yes. And but why do you do what you do?
Well, my hope is just to serve and to please the Lord, you know. And since I became a believer as a little guy, something that in my legacy of my parents, something that they taught me early on is you have one goal in life, only one thing in life that you're supposed to do, and that is to love the Lord Jesus with all your heart, mind, and soul, and all your strength, and to serve him. And that is my goal, and I do that imperfectly for sure. My critics can point that out. My kids can point that out. But that's, you know, my wife and I together as we go on this journey. I mean, that's her heart, that's my heart. And what motivates me is just trying to do what the Lord, be faithful to what the Lord called me to do. He's called me to serve the people of Missouri and to represent them and to represent their principles and our values in the United States Senate. So I try to do that to the best of my ability every single day.
For the eyes of history, this is the reason Mike Pence will always be referred to as Mike the Traitor to the average American. He bloviates behind a polished wall of pseudo-Christianese that can fool the very elect. But after one or two indigestible helpings of this mile-a-minute disinformation blabber that he's practiced, the average American sees right through him as not only a traitor to the citadel of world freedom, but to the man who plucked him from obscurity, Donald Trump. Therefore, to obscurity he is destined to return. I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of world freedom. Good day.